Good evening, everyone. Okay, I think we'll start out by quoting Galatians. Thank you. Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Probably most of us know it by heart. If you want to, you can turn to it. That's what we're going to be studying the first session here this evening. So Galatians chapter 5, 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And let's review what the more common words are. Last evening we went over that. So love, I like to think of that as agape, because in our minds we get a little bit confused by what the meaning of love is. We associate it so much with a feeling, but it actually is not necessarily a feeling, and we're going to talk about that this evening. Joy is joy throughout, regardless of the translations, and then peace as well. But then the word for long-suffering, what did we decide is a word that more accurately talks about what the meaning is in our vernacular today? What's the word? Patience, that's right. And then the word for gentleness. Kindness. The word for goodness is same. And then the word for faith, what is that? Faithfulness. And then meekness is translated as what? Gentleness. And temperance? Self-control. Okay, so I'd like to just think a little bit about the verse in John 15. I'm not sure which verse it is, but it says, "Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit." And before we go into the actual fruit of love, joy, peace, I'd like to look at that a little bit. Bearing much fruit. It doesn't just say, "Herein is my Father glorified that ye bear fruit." It says much fruit. Any ideas on that? What are your thoughts on the much fruit? Okay.
Not the areas with a few berries.
Okay. There's something attractive about a bush that is full, isn't it? Any more comments? Well, I have a story that I think gets at what I am thinking about. So, a couple years ago, we attended a wedding. One of our staff got married in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. What is that, 2 hours from here? Something like that? And anyway, it was in the summertime, and we were looking at the crops and talking about the farmland there. And the man I was talking with, I think he was a farmer. And as I remember the story, the people from Shippensburg had moved down there from this community. Is that right? I think that's the way he understood it, is that they would have migrated there from here. And then as they got established, they started farming, and they would, of course, look back to Lancaster County, and they had a hard time matching the output of the farmers here in Lancaster County. They just didn't get the bushels per acre from their corn. And for a while, the feeling was that those people, those farmers, they just didn't really have their act together like the farmers of Lancaster County did, until they realized that there was actually a difference in the soil. The soil here is more fertile and produces more. And so that gave them a sense of vindication, I guess, that they were not, even though it wasn't their fault, it wasn't the farmer's fault that they were not getting the yield. So if we think about that story, and then we think about the verse in John 15, are there any lessons there for us? What do you think?
Well, it's obvious Lancaster are just better Christians.
Okay, well is that pretty much throughout?
I mean, you're talking about much fruit, so apparently Lancaster glorifies God.
We're in the right place. It's not that we're better, we're connected to the right.
Help me out.
Okay, I know you were saying that tongue in cheek. Yeah. What did you say?
Because he sprays.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, what are your ideas on that?
The fruit we bear is connected to the soil we're growing in,
Okay.
nutrients that we're putting into it,
That's a good lesson. Yeah.
what we're connected to.
Yeah. So there are people here that are putting things into the soil to make it grow better. So
I
that
think of the parable where God gave some talents, but they all bear some kind of fruit.
yeah.
Not as much, but God still was glorified, even though they didn't maybe bring as much.
Would it be fair to insist that the people of Shippensburg, the farmers in Shippensburg, produce just as much as they do here, where the soil is actually better? Is that realistic?
Well, you said they didn't.
They didn't, but should we expect them to? Do you think God expects them to? I don't think that's reasonable.
No, because he doesn't give them as much rain either.
Okay. So you typically get more rain up here? I guess what I'm thinking about,
So there in that, some of the areas are quite rocky too.
okay, yeah, which is, yeah, the soil conditions. I guess what I'm thinking about is that, well, the Bible says to whom much is given, much is expected, right? I think there's a principle there when it comes to fruit bearing. We've been given a lot, haven't we? We really have. And somehow I think that maybe God expects more from those of us that have been given a lot. We have a rich environment to produce fruit. And so I guess as I'm thinking about that, I think that our goal should be to produce much fruit, however that happens. I remember a time in my life that I would have felt that desire to be useful. And I mentioned last evening that sometimes it takes time, okay? I was thinking about that this evening as we were outside there, and the parents that are here with your young children, that's about a full-time job to raise a family. Now we try to do other things too. The dads have to provide an income, but the seeds are being planted for fruit. bringing them here this evening. There are seeds that are being planted, and we hope that it will produce fruit sometime. And so I don't know that, I think we should be concerned about the amount of fruit that our lives are producing, but probably even more of what we should focus on is that we're being consistent and we're just doing the right thing as we go through life. And I think God has a way of using faithfulness and consistency to eventually produce fruit, like a tree that might sit there for years before that first fruit actually shows up. So don't get too concerned about, hey, what is the fruit that I'm producing and can I measure it? More, be faithful and do what God leads you to, and the fruit will be there. I guess those were just some of the thoughts that I was having today and this evening. Before we get into the specifics, we'd like to look at the first four this evening, the first four qualities that go with that fruit. Are there more thoughts on things we discussed last evening or even this evening?
I really like the idea of faithfulness and in contrast to faith. And I've been doing some thinking about that even in Hebrews chapter 11. And in my Bible, in the heading, I wrote down, it's the chapter of faithfulness. Because the faith of those men came out and was evident by the things they did,
Yeah.
which is faithfulness. And the word faithfulness just brings a whole different dimension to it because the consistency is a part of that.
Yes.
And that just now, I really like that.
Could the rest of you hear that? Yeah, Curtis he said he really likes the faithfulness idea and how that was demonstrated in the faith chapter. Any more thoughts?
Jesus in John 14 really strongly emphasized the matter of abiding, constancy, continuing, practicing the presence of Christ. I've been trying to do that more. At the moment, just practicing His presence.
Yes.
And, prayer, just instant, continuing instant in prayer. Just fellowship with Him. But constantly, that mind is separates from the evading trunk will see God. We need to just stay close. And that's grace. Grace will give us power for that sap to flow. But we need to do our part to abide, stay close.
I like to hear that you're thinking about these things. Are there more thoughts? Well, let's get into the actual the qualities of someone who has God's Spirit in them. Love is the first one that is mentioned. And I think there's a reason for that. Love seems to be, the Bible actually says that it's the most important thing as it comes, faith, hope, and charity. The greatest of these is love. And the love chapter, which we want to take a look at, is very clear on the importance of everything that we do has to be done with love, or it's really meaningless. So I'm going to share, I told you yesterday that I'm going to weave some stories in about Faith Mission Home. So there's a good story here, true story, and it's about one of our students, and her name is Chrissy. Chrissy is about this tall when she's standing up, And she is about my age. I think she's really close to Bernice's age. We're close to the same age, but anyway, Chrissy is nonverbal. She was neglected as a young child, and she is a intelligent little girl, but just looking at her, you would not really think that she understands much of anything. Now, when our staff get to know her, they realize that she understands a lot. In fact, she has people she likes and people she doesn't like. We've had times when we've had staff that were responsible for her and she just didn't like them, and she made life really rough for these people. But most of the time, she's a pleasant lady, and it's probably been 4.5 years ago that she started having some weak spells, and our healthcare supervisor took her to the doctor, and the doctor analyzed her. We did some tests, and he said she is having heart failure. And he said, when this happens, she probably won't last very long. And we had actually been working on finding another place for Chrissy to stay because of her age. Once the students get to be too old, Faith Mission Home is not the best place for them anymore. And because of her age, we were looking at other options, and we actually had a place picked out for her to go, and then this happened. And so our doctor said, yeah, she's on her way out. Here's what's going to happen is she's going to have to go on oxygen, and then she's going to lose out slowly. And so we said, what can we expect? And he said, 6 months, maybe a year. And so we had told the doctor that we're actually looking for another place for Chrissy to stay. This is a doctor that knows Faith Mission Home well. He comes out once a month, and he is kind of in charge of our students. And so when we explained to him that we are looking for another place and that this is no longer the best place for her to stay, he said no. No, he stopped us right in our tracks, and he said, this is the best place for her. You might have places that are more trained for her care, for medical care, but he said she will get taken care of better here. And you know, our program, we don't have highly skilled staff. They come there from people like you, and they don't have any training. But we do emphasize very much that love is the basis of our training program. That's where it starts. And our staff, they love the students. They really do. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but there is positive peer pressure to love the students. Sometimes it almost seems like there's a competition to see, how close you can get to the students and how well they like you. So they're generally very kind and loving, but that is the basis of our program. And so when Chrissy got sick, we thought, how can we do this? She has lived here for almost her whole life. She has one remaining relative in Charlottesville who is a very old lady, and she doesn't visit her anymore. We are her family. So we made the decision that she will not be discharged, and we're just going to take care of her until she passes. Well, so we had a staff meeting, the next staff meeting. We explained this to our staff. And we're a training facility, so if they do something that is, out of line, we try to help them get past it. We have corrective actions that we take. We try to use positive reinforcement. But for Chrissy, we said, look, she's in the last months of her life. Just celebrate her. Treat her like a celebrity, and no more training, okay? Love her. Just love her well. Well, 6 months came and went, and a year came and went, and she's still with us 4.5 years later. And to me, she looks like she's just as well off as she was. She is on oxygen, but I can't tell a difference. And I keep thinking, we actually went ahead and we found a burial plot for her. We had a casket made, and that casket is just collecting dust in storage. And I'm not sure, but I think it's because she has become a celebrity and people are just loving her. They are loving her well. And so I think love is powerful. People thrive on love. And that's what we're called to do as Christians, is to love each other well. And by the way, that love doesn't even have to be a feeling. It does not, okay, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I think probably most of us here could think of someone that we don't really have warm, fuzzy, loving feelings for. It's just the way it works. Sometimes we just have a hard time with someone. But somehow I find it to be, it's just freeing to know that that doesn't have to be. We can still love. We can choose to love. So that's the story on Chrissy. Love, there's so much that we could talk about, but you know what? We have to keep on moving. But I'm going to open it up briefly. Is there something that someone wants to say about love before we go on to joy?
In 1 Thessalonians, Paul admonished the church numerous times to love. Some of those times, love is a phileo love, family love.
Yes.
Promoting that in a church setting, in a fellowship, in a group of believers, he's promoting family love. It's not always agape love.
Okay, I'm glad you pointed that out, teacher. Yeah, I chatted with Mel last evening, and Mel understands those things deeply, and I appreciate that. That's a good point. It's not always agape, but what you're saying is that within a church, it's the phileo love that is like a family love. Very, very good point.
I would agree with that, because if you have agape love for each other, that might be the highest kind of love. But in a church setting, we always have to be having agape love for each other, then there's something wrong.
Yeah, hopefully,
We have feelings for each other.
yes.
Between Dave and I, I don't know.
You want to make an exception there? Okay.
So Hosea, you're 40 other plus residents, so you're doing training with them and you're continuing to use discipline and all that. You're still loving them. You're loving them a little differently than you're loving them.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad you pointed that out. There is still love there, but somehow we just encouraged our staff to just pour it on for Chrissy. Yeah. Let's go to joy. So Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah, he said, the joy of the Lord is my strength. Probably most,
Before the Holy Spirit came.
yeah. Okay, that was before the Holy Spirit, that's right. Okay, probably most of us here deal with discouragement sometimes. I don't know if it's quite accurate to say that discouragement is the opposite of joy, but it's getting close. And one of the things that amazes me is that when I am discouraged, it feels like I have no energy. And a simple task looks formidable. But when the joy is there, after a good night of sleep, or if, once that joy returns, it feels like this is no problem. Joy, the joy of the Lord, something that comes as we have God's Spirit in us, is actually a very powerful thing. And I think that when we are discouraged, it is a sign that we should try to get past it. We're wired differently, and some of us probably deal with it more than others, but discouragement is something that I think it is an experience that Christians have, but we should try to not live in discouragement and despair. Joy, have a smile on your face. Your countenance, what do people see when they look at you? It's important. I've tried to, there was a time I consciously tried to do that if I would go in and be in public. It was kind of an experiment that I did. Wear a smile, walk through Lowe's in the aisles, and try to see if you can engage other people without really even saying that much, but try to have an open countenance and a joyful spirit about you. It is actually very powerful. And I don't know why God made us this way, but when I am around someone else who is in the dumps, I have a hard time feeling good. But the same thing is true if I'm around a joyful person. It just lifts you up. And God made us to affect each other. And it just seems to me that the fruit of the Spirit, joy, is something that we should cultivate and really try to work at. I love discussions about optimism versus pessimism. And what do you think? Is it okay for a Christian to be pessimistic? Everything is blue, and we think the sky's going to fall in sometime within the next month. What do you think? I think the whole optimism versus pessimism is, sometimes we're not even talking about the same thing. I've heard the idea that we need pessimists to offset the optimists, because optimistic people, or the optimists, are going to just do crazy things, and they're not realistic. But I think what I'm thinking about as an optimistic person is someone who has a positive outlook on life and looks at that list in Philippians where the things we should think on, they're generally optimistic things, aren't they? So it seems to me that it's pretty clear that we should be joyful people. Philippians 4, verse 4, it says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." And again, I say, rejoice. So,
We're trying to produce joy, but it's also a natural fruit. So how do we get that joy?
okay.
I'm just, and the one thing that I'm thinking of is claiming the promises that God has in God's Word. So whenever, whenever I'm feeling discouraged, there's promises that God has given to us that should rise us above that discouragement. So I think God's promises and claiming them can bring joy.
Okay. So it's very true what you said, Dave. But those promises are true for everyone, and not everyone always has joy. So what is the answer? Is it
So are you saying that it's a choice?
well, have you ever recognized that you're in the dumps and I'm going to be joyful, and an hour later you're still not feeling too hot? Has that ever happened? You've made the choice, but it still doesn't quite get there. So the question is, how do you get joyful if you're not feeling it?
The joy of the Lord is my strength.
Okay,
Yeah, that's.
we know that.
I mean, that's.
The fruit of the Spirit is joy. I'm on Rachel's side.
That's right. Who said that? Singing. Oh.
Start
I will
singing.
say this. I'm going to say something with my son. There's times I came home from work discouraged.
Yeah.
And the last thing I felt like doing as a father was to have devotions and sing. But because we've done it on a fairly regular basis, we would eat and we're getting done to eat, and I'm like, I think we're just going to let it. And Tim would say, Dad, song. Dad, sing. And he would get pestering. And once we started singing, maybe the first song, but after a while, something, just by my choice of choosing to sing, something had released.
Thank you for that testimony.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I heard the story of a man that when he was growing up, the tendency, I've got you there, Javon. The tendency, I'll write after this story. The tendency was for this big family to be flustered and uptight on a Sunday morning because it was so stressful to get everybody ready for church and out in the vehicle, and Dad hated to be late, and so finally they had the people in the vehicle, but the tension had built up.
Are you talking about us? I didn't think I told you that story.
I am noticing a lot of knowing faces here. Anyway, it happened in our family, but this man was talking about when he was growing up, and he said his dad would start singing. And he said he didn't like it very good because he knew that his dad was singing because he was frustrated. I would like to submit this yet. Sometimes we just can't quite get a hold of our emotions, but it is something that we can cultivate. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, "He that has no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls." And I take that to mean our emotions. Our emotions are our friends, but if we can't control them, we're like a city that is broken down and without walls. So yeah, I just feel like it is something that we should be cultivating. It's time for break.
Okay, let's sing, well, before that, make one suggestion to a second song, we shout out, and let's sing, "You Place Me on High Place." We place you on the highest place.
Well, we did not get through peace and patience, but we did have a really good discussion on love and joy. Let's shift gears now and talk about the gifts. In reviewing, the gifts are given for what?
The edifying of the body of Christ.
Yes. They're not given for individuals to show them off or for any other reason, but they're given for the upbuilding of the body of Christ. What are two good reasons to study the motivational gifts? Two things that I mentioned last evening.
Every gift has a negative aspect to it.
Yes, so that we understand the baggage that can come with it, or the tendencies that go with our gift. And what was the other one that we mentioned?
Help us work together.
Yes, to help us work together or to understand other people better. So another story from Faith Mission Home that illustrates this really well. Two of our cottage girls, one of them isn't there anymore, but Shirley and Sandra, they lived together at the Rose Lane Cottage for quite a few years. And both of them had limitations, but they also, they could both do something that the other one couldn't. And Shirley could not read, but she was pretty good at following verbal instructions. Sandra, on the other hand, she could read pretty well, but then she had a difficult time comprehending what she read. And they lived together, they were friends, and the tendency could have been for Sandra to kind of look down her nose at Shirley because she could read and Shirley couldn't. Shirley could have felt inferior to Sandra because Sandra could read and she couldn't. Now she could also have Shirley could have looked down her nose at Sandra because she was better with her hands and she could actually outperform Sandra in a lot of areas. But neither of them did that. They were just okay with who they were. And they complemented each other as they lived together. And they discovered that if they put the two girls together in a kitchen, Sandra, who can read, could read the recipe. Now she could read the recipe, but she didn't have the wherewithal to crack the eggs and to measure out the flour and the sugar. But when she read it to Shirley, Shirley could do that. So they could take a cookie recipe and Sandra would read the recipe and then Shirley would do it. And they would make cookies that way. And they did this repeatedly, and it was just the way it worked. Now, when they cooperated, they got to eat cookies. But when they didn't cooperate, nobody got cookies. That's kind of the way it works for us, isn't it? Now, I don't know if cookies are what edify the church really, but in a sense, when we pool our abilities, we edify each other. We get cookies. Things go better. Our church life and our light shines brighter. Everything is better, and we glorify God more when we work together. I don't know for sure. I sometimes think we are probably more dependent on each other than we realize. Last week, I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm just gonna find it here. I printed it out and read a little bit to you about that. Here it is. Okay, the headline is, "Jobs for the Autistic Grow Beyond Tech." Okay, what the article is about, there was a term that was used there that I hadn't heard it before. Have any of you heard of the term neurodiversity or neurodivergent? Okay, Mima has, a few of you have. That was the first time I had read it, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. Neurodiversity or neurodivergent, basically different way of thinking. And the terminology for what we used to call people with mental disabilities that has a negative enough connotation that a new word has been coined, and now it is neurodivergent. People with a different way of thinking. But this article is about autistic people that have unique abilities, and they are discovering in the workforce that they can tap into these abilities in a very profitable way. Tommy Abrams is a student that has been there for a long time, and Tommy has the ability, if you tell him your birth date, including the year you were born, he will tell you, just like that, what day of the week it was. It will take him just about as long to come up with the day of the week as it would me to come up with what color shirt Dave is wearing. It's just there. And there are people that have those unique abilities. I heard of a man that, a neurodivergent person, who could look at a map and he would scan it, and then he had it. And a city employed him, put him by a phone, and advertised it, and people that were lost could call him, and he would say, no, what you need, where are you? And they would tell him, and then he would say, you need to take this bus to this station, and then from there you get onto the metro, and he had this all memorized, everything. And it was in his head. What seemed to be supernatural abilities among the neurodivergent. And as I work with the students there, and I realize the abilities that many of them have, that people that we think are not as intelligent as we are, you realize that God has given them, many of them, abilities that are over and above what we have. And as I'm thinking about that, sometimes I wonder, who is neurodivergent? Like, I kind of think maybe we all are. And we just have this misconception that we are normal. But we aren't really. And I think that as we study the gifts, the more we can just recognize that there are unique abilities and unique things that are in every person's life that can be a tremendous blessing to the church, to each other, if we realize it and we tap into it. I wonder, there's a term and a phenomena that I'm not even sure if I have the word for it. I knew about it, but I didn't know what it was called until today when I was studying it, and I forgot the name. But there are people that when they are experiencing a certain one of the five senses, that they experience something else with that sense. What I'm talking about is when they see, or when they think of a color, maybe they have a number that is associated with that. That's not that uncommon. Or when they smell something or hear something, it triggers a smell. Those are things that are actually not that uncommon. I wouldn't be surprised there would be people in this crowd that have a bit of that. I've talked with enough people, and it's really not that uncommon. We're unique. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. We are unique. And the Bible addresses that in Romans chapter 12. 1 Corinthians talks about it. And so I think it's helpful for us to really appreciate the diversity that we have. And I also believe that God somehow puts people together. In the path of life that we find ourselves in, I think that God, in this church, He has given you what you need to function well. I think I see that within organizations. Not everybody is like-minded on our team. And at Faith Mission Home, we have diversity there. Some of the men that I work with think very differently from what I do. And so, yeah, that is something that if we understand, I think we are much better off. We are all a bit neurodivergent, I think. Okay, let's get into the different gifts, and there are 7 of them. And what I've done is I have, by the way, the book that I'm using, I use this at Calvary Bible School, it's called Understanding Spiritual Gifts. It's one of the better books that I've come across. You may or may not agree with everything that's in here, but it's put out by IBLP, and it's easy to understand and quite practical. And it has the 7 gifts here, and it gives the characteristics and then also the misuses, okay? And it picks out a Bible character that illustrates each one of the gifts. And so this is largely what I have been used to or have been using. And so we're going to get started with the spiritual gift of a prophet. So does anyone know what character in the Bible is often referred to as this prophet? I'm sure some of you know. Who is it? It's actually not. Someone else. Who was outspoken? And he was usually the first one to say something. It was Peter, yes. Okay, so a prophet is someone, in the Old Testament, a prophet would foretell an event. But in the New Testament, and even today, I believe a prophet is someone more who is, he tells the truth, okay? Now, someone that doesn't beat around the bush, he beats on the bush, and isn't afraid to say hard things. That is a prophet. And we benefit by them, even if we don't always like what they have to say. Let me read some of the traits that go with a prophet, both positive and negative. One of them is They have a need to express themselves. It's hard to hold it in. It's just, when there's a discussion, they're talking. Okay? That is a trait of a prophet. Generally seen as a good thing. A negative one that may kind of go with that is when someone is doing wrong, they can be really hard on them, and they can expose that person without really having the goal of restoring. They're almost more concerned about exposing what is wrong than they are about helping the person back and working toward reconciliation. A prophet can make a quick impression of a person. They'll look at them, and before they barely say a word, they know what's going on. Sometimes they're right. A lot of times they are actually spot on. Now, they aren't always right, though. And one of the good things about a prophet is that when they are wrong, they can back down, and they can just acknowledge it. They'll be hard on themselves because they're so concerned about truth. So they can jump to conclusions. That is a trait. Peter did some of that, didn't he? Alert to dishonesty. Think of the story of Ananias and Sapphira. Kind of think maybe if John would have been at the helm right at that time, I don't know if he would have. I mean, basically what happened is Ananias and Sapphira came in, and I don't know for sure how Peter suspected that they were cheating a little bit. But he called them on the carpet, and he basically said, "You're a goner." Isn't that what happened? And they fell over dead. First it was Ananias and then Sapphira. Somehow, I don't know if John would have done that. But Peter, somehow he understood that this is a serious matter, and now of course God was in it too, but Peter was very harsh. Prophets have a desire for justice, very concerned about what is right. There is a tendency also that goes with prophets to be unforgiving because they're so hardline about things. Prophets are very open about their own faults. I've been amazed as I've observed someone who I believe to be a prophet, how quickly they can just say, "Oh, that was terrible what I did. And they're just very unashamed to admit how wrong they were. That is a trait of a prophet. But then they can also be maybe overly critical of themselves. So that might be a downside. A prophet can be very persuasive in defending truth. They are bold. They don't shy away from controversial subjects, and they just say, "This is the way it is." Maybe a downside to that trait is when everything is black and white. Recently we had a staff fella that I really liked him. He was an outstanding person, but everything was black and white to him. And not everything in life is black and white, is it? There are so many things that there's more than one way to look at it. And I finally told him, he was the kind of person, I think he was maybe a prophet, so he could take it. But I finally told him that he should remember that not everything in life is black and white. And yeah, he took it well. So those are some of the traits of a prophet. Any comments? I know some of you have studied this as well, and I am not very dogmatic on these things, but these are things that generally are true with a prophet. Peter,
Like in each of these gifts, it's 7, and then in verses 9, 10, 11, and 12, and so on, kind of are like an amplifier or like a cushioner to each of these gifts. Like verse 9, certainly will always be the man of the prophet, or woman. Let love be without dissimulation.
yes.
Abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good, and so on.
Yeah, yeah, what's the word? Complements. It complements these gifts. Yes, thank you, Floyd. Any more comments on prophet before we move on? Okay, let's go to server. The example of a server in the Bible. Does anyone have an idea of someone that served other people? Someone in the New Testament? Does anyone know? You want to venture a guess? Oh, well, that probably could work, yes. But that's not who they chose here. I think you were ready. Dorcas also could work. This was a man. Timothy. Timothy was someone that he was with Paul a lot of the time, and it seems, if you get the sense, it seems like Paul had a work to do and Timothy was there kind of as his co-pilot, helping him along. Let's look at the traits of a server, both maybe good and some that if you're a server, you need to be careful about. A server sees and meets practical needs. I have a sister-in-law at family gatherings. There's always food there, okay? And Bernice's family, pretty large family, and so she will work and work and work to prepare for the company. And then the company comes and she keeps right on working up right until the meal time. And you would think that now she would sit down and enjoy the meal that she worked so hard to make. I don't know if I've ever seen her sit down. She keeps right on working right through the meal, and she's making sure that there's plenty of food there for seconds, and people are finding the coffee and the water. And then everybody eats, and finally they're done with the dessert, and she still hasn't sat down to eat. And she keeps right on going. Throughout the evening, then she's washing dishes and putting stuff away, and gets late, and she's still going. It kind of bugs other people sometimes, like, Janice, sit down. You haven't eaten yet. Some of you, I think, kind of can identify. Is that right? That is a server. She is motivated by serving. I think it just makes her feel good. I think for her to sit down and let anyone else do some of the work it's just not a part of who she is. That is a server. They see the needs and they go and they do it. You probably can think of people like that even here in church. They're just going all the time, serving. The downside of that, can anyone think what a downside might be?
Martha, you're comforted about many things.
Yeah, sometimes it's better to just sit down, right? Have you ever gotten help from someone and you would have just assumed they didn't help you? That's something a server can do that, okay? So if you're a server, be thoughtful about that and don't give unsolicited help. A server frees others to achieve. A lot of times servers are not front and central, but they're doing the behind the scenes work. A server disregards weariness. They're tired, but they just keep right on going because it feels actually good for them to be just wore out and tired. But then say sometimes they can actually work a little too hard. Now, the deduction was made about Timothy. Remember what Paul said one time? He said, take a little wine for your stomach's sake. Well, there were a lot of assumptions going on here, but the assumption was made that because he overextended himself, there was some stress that went with that, and servers sometimes develop health issues because they can't say no. They just can't say no. And so they keep on trying, and they're motivated to serve. There is a downside, another downside to serving, and that servers is they neglect God-given priorities. You know, we have specific responsibilities, but when our focus is out on serving and we just can't say no, sometimes we neglect God-given priorities. Servers are very alert to likes and dislikes of other people because they can serve better that way. A downside, and I have seen this with a server that I know really well, someone that we go to church with in Plain City, good server, but he gets irritated if there are overlooked needs that other people should be taken care of. Because he sees them, why don't the other people see them? And he gets frustrated because he might even have mentioned it to whoever's responsible, but they just didn't get around to it. So that can be a tendency for servers, is to react to overlooked needs. So that's a server. Some of the more prominent traits of people that are servers. Any comments before we move on to the gift of a teacher?
So I don't know when time to bring this up, when's a good time to bring this up, but you mentioned that God has made us all very unique.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on mixed gifts or someone that has multiple gifts? And I guess along with that, our personality that each one is born with, what do you think of that in relation to our...
Spiritual gifts. Okay. I'm going to comment on your last question, and then last evening after church, I was talking to Mel, and Mel presented his idea on your first question about having...
Maybe you want to talk about it tomorrow night too.
No, this is good. And Mel explained it so nicely that I'd like for him to explain it again about, okay, what about a situation where maybe not all the gifts are present, or are there more than one? Would you be willing to comment on that, Mel, then? Okay, I think he can explain it better than I can. But, see, what was your second question again? Oh, yes, personality. Yeah.
What do you, sometimes I think people view spiritual gifts as like some magical thing that God gives us when we become a Christian. What is your view on the personality that we're born with and our spiritual gift?
Okay.
How much separation or correlation?
Yes. Well, some of the gifts are obvious, or you can see qualities in people that are not saved, not born again. People that are not born again, there are good leaders, and there are people that have those traits. However, my take on that is that when we have God's Spirit working in our life, it takes those natural abilities that God has given us, and it puts another dimension to it that is now more wonderful and more powerful, way more powerful, because God's Spirit is putting the wind in the sails. That's a pretty elementary explanation, but that's, I guess, how I see it.
No, I completely agree with you.
Okay.
I feel sometimes that doesn't come through clear enough.
Yeah.
And
Good question. A really good question. Yeah. Mel, on his other question.
Well, if you're in a group of people and
His Holy Spirit would enable a person to be able to exercise a gift even though he may not be his strength. And so if you're in a church where maybe there's not many teachers, I don't think it's out of place for a server to teach.
Yes.
And so I think we need to be open to that, and the Holy Spirit will guide and direct and empower as the need arises, even though we may not have a specific calling in that particular area. And so just because a person sees himself as having a gift of serving doesn't mean that he can't teach a Sunday school class and sometimes even maybe be ordained to the ministry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. We can't really put God in a box. And one thing that I'm not sure if I really mentioned it last evening, but I think the best way for us to develop our gift is to just be willing to serve in whatever capacity we have opportunity to. And somehow that gift gets developed. I think in a church setting, we kind of know what the abilities are. And so the way we do it is we ask people to serve in a certain capacity, and if it doesn't go that well, there are other people to help out, but then probably someone else might get appointed to something. Somehow a person's gift gets put to use within a church. And so willingness is a much more important trait than actually knowing, okay, I have this gift, therefore I'm not going to do other things. But just be willing to do what you're asked to. And if you can't, that's okay also. But be pretty slow to say that I just am not gifted in a certain area. Somehow it all works out beautifully most of the time. Thanks for bringing those questions up. Let's take a quick look. We have just several minutes left on the qualities of a teacher. Now, teachers are not always school teachers or Sunday school teachers. You can have that gift and be useful elsewhere. But a teacher is someone that is really concerned about truth and accuracy. I had a conversation one time with someone who, well, he believed in a conspiracy. And in the end, we had a nice conversation about it. And in the end, okay, it was about flat Earth. And so in the end, he said, well, he guesses that he can believe in a flat Earth and I can believe in a ball, and we'll probably both get to heaven. And his point was, it doesn't really matter. I had a little hard time with that because I think that it does matter. I don't think that if we say 2 + 2 is 5, somehow there's consequences that go with that. And so I believe that God, being a God of truth, we don't know everything, but we should care pretty deeply about truth. And a teacher is someone who is especially tuned into that. And they want accurate information. That is a trait of a teacher. They do a lot of research. Let me go down over the list here. One negative thing is that a teacher can become proud of the knowledge that he has acquired and assimilated over the years. A teacher checks out other teachers. Are they for sure accurate on that thing? By the way, Luke is given as an example of a teacher. Gathers many facts. It's interesting that Luke, the Gospel of Luke, is longer than the other Gospels. There are things in the book of Luke that the others left out, He felt like it's important. And so a teacher often has many details. He is uneasy with subjective truth. Okay? Well, it could be this or it could be that. Or based on this, we're going to say it's this way. He wants hard and accurate, hard and fast truths. A downside to a teacher is that they can argue over minor points. It's kind of insignificant, but we make a big deal out of it. So those are things with a teacher. We kind of rushed through that last one, but it is time to close down. Thank you. I've enjoyed the interaction. Look forward to tomorrow evening.